This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
World powers agree to respect arms embargo and push for ceasefire in Libya conflict. US plans to reduce its troops in Africa. What does it portend for security in volatile regions? And China working with multiple parties and the WHO to control coronavirus as South Korea confirms one case on Monday. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme. In business, the UK hosts 16 African leaders for trade talks days ahead of Brexit. And in sports, Egyptian Mohamed Saleh on target as Liverpool beat Manchester United to move closer to the Premier League title. We begin in Libya and hope that peace could be returning to the North African nation. World leaders have agreed to respect a United Nations arms embargo and put pressure on different factions to reach a political solution. But the meeting in Berlin on Sunday failed to produce a ceasefire. CGTN's Ira Spitzer reports from the German capital.
Some of the world's most powerful figures descended on Berlin. The goal: to push forward stalled peace talks among Libya's rival factions. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said she'd extracted commitments to reduce the flow of weapons into the country.
We were able to see that everyone is in agreement, that the weapons embargo needs to be respected, and the weapons embargo needs to be more strictly controlled than has happened in the past.
The North African country has become a flashpoint for competing interests from outside forces. Turkey has supported the UN-backed government, which controls the capital Tripoli and little else. But Russia, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt back rebels led by General Khalifa Haftar. Rich in oil and gas resources and a hub for irregular migrant flows to Europe, Libya is strategically important for a number of countries. Conference organizers said that there was a will to find a solution.
I cannot stress enough the summit's conclusion that there is no military solution to the conflict in Libya. All participants have mentioned it several times during the meeting.
Ahead of the talks, European leaders signaled that they were willing to increase engagement.
Well, if there is a ceasefire, yes, of course, there's a case for us doing what we do very well, which is sending people, experts, to monitor the ceasefire. I don't see any ceasefire at the moment. That's what we're arguing for today.
But the elusive ceasefire wasn't agreed to in Berlin, just as it wasn't in Moscow last week. And the two rival factions didn't even meet face to face. With the recent escalations, there are worries time could be running out for a peaceful solution. Ira Spitzer, CGTN, Berlin.
Our correspondent Adel El Mahrouhi now reports from Cairo on what impact the Berlin conference could have on the Libyan conflict.
At the peak of the fighting over Tripoli in August, Germany has started to move with the UN to bring peace in Libya. But world leaders have rushed with this meeting only when tensions between Egypt and Turkey appear to be turning into a proxy war in Libya.
That escalation has reached in the last few days a very dangerous dimension. Until now we had an escalation of a Libyan conflict with some foreign interference. Now we were facing the risk of a true regional escalation. And that risk was averted in Berlin, provided, of course, that it is possible to maintain the truce and then to move into a ceasefire.
Berlin's conference announced that countries involved in Libya say they won't breach the UN arms embargo in efforts to maintain a truce. The world is joining hands for Libya, yet both representatives of the troubled nation, al-Sarraj and Haftar, have refrained from joining the conference.
We talk to them individually because the difference between the two parties are still of such a magnitude that don't speak to each other for the time being. They did not actively participate in the conference. They were not in the same room, but they were in Berlin. That allowed us to brief them of the discussion that happened.
No matter how promising Berlin appears to be, analysts believe that it could not be implemented, at least for now.
Any agreement that does not suit the Libyan National Army won't be implemented unless it's included stopping Turkish intervention and dissolving the militias. A lasting ceasefire depends on the militias. Al-Sarraj has no authority over them. Actually, there's no power in Libya which is capable of implementing any agreement on the ground.
For that particular reason, the UN has proposed forming a 5+5 military committee formed from 5 representatives from the LNA and 5 from the GNA. It will be the first UN committee which is linked to the forces fighting on the ground. In Berlin, General Khalifa Haftar has announced his representatives for the 5+5 military committee. Its formation is now complete. The UN says the committee will convene within the next few days in Geneva to start discussing how to turn the ongoing truce into a fully fledged ceasefire. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
European foreign affairs ministers are set to meet in Brussels to discuss the situation in the Sahel and recent developments in the Middle East. The ministers will discuss the EU strategy on this region in order to strengthen the commitment of the EU and its member states. They'll present the progress achieved at the recently held summit in Pau about boosting military cooperation in the Sahel. Well, we have our reporter, Michael Voss, joining us live from Brussels. Michael, what more do we know about what will be discussed, and what can you say about the timing of this meeting?
Karen, the European foreign ministers are meeting across the road as we speak. It is a broader agenda, not just the Sahel. They'll be discussing Libya and whether the EU will be part of a monitoring organization looking at both the arms embargo, possibly the ceasefire, discussing the Middle East and climate change. On the Sahel, as you mentioned, this meeting comes 1 week after the French summit in Pau called by France's President Emmanuel Macron, with the 5 leaders of the 5 what's called G5 Sahel countries. We're talking now about Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad and Mauritania. At that meeting last week, it was agreed that the African nations would work under a unified command, and also they were setting up what was called a Takuba task force, which would see Europeans working under a unified special force, a unified command. The trouble is that the French are having difficulty in getting other EU countries to agree to take part in that. And this is really going to be, I think, at the heart of the discussion here amongst European foreign ministers. The French have announced they're going to add 200 troops to the 4,500 there. Estonia and Denmark already have some commitment, and the British are providing helicopters. Some European countries are part of the EU, the United Nations peacekeeping force in the region, and the Americans have a drone base in Niger. Concerns, as you mentioned earlier, that the Americans may pull out of Africa. We're expecting a press conference at about 3 local time. Don't expect to hear any exact numbers on troops, but we may get some commitments to take this back to their governments.
Let's talk a little bit about the difference between France and the other EU countries. French troops, as we know, are there to protect French interest in West Africa. What then would be the motivation for other EU countries to get involved in the Sahel region?
Well, what's going on in the Sahel at the moment involving Islamic extremism is really something that is concerned not just to the French but to the whole of Europe and the wider world. The growth of both Islamic State and Al-Qaeda in the region, jihadi fighters, the fighting has intensified this year alone with casualties in Niger and a French helicopter crash. So there are fears that this Sahel region could turn, if you like, into another caliphate, another Syria, and then you're going to see terrorists exported to Europe and beyond. So there is this concern that goes well beyond simply, French West Africa. At the same time, there is concerns here in Europe about a broader humanitarian crisis in this Sahel region. According to the EU Commission, climate change, drought, food shortages. There are more than 20 million people in need of humanitarian aid. There's been internal displacement of some 5 million people. And this also could be reflected in new waves of migration coming into Europe. So there is much more concern here than simply France's role in this region.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was our reporter Michael Voss there on the EU meeting taking place in Brussels on the Sahel region and also on other Middle Eastern concerns. Moving on to other news now, to Somalia, where authorities say US strikes against terror groups have allowed the country's army to make inroads into militant strongholds. And as the US plans to reduce its footprint on the continent, CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo explains how the move will impact Somalia's counter-terrorism efforts.
Last year, 47 strikes were conducted on militant targets in the Horn of Africa, targeting Al-Shabaab in southern Somalia and the Islamic State group based in the northern regions of the country. Security officials in Somalia say the strikes have helped turn the tide against Africa's deadliest militant group.
US strikes have assisted in the stabilization process of Lower Shabelle and other regions, but the primary focus has been professionalizing Somali security forces and training elite forces. Its biggest role has been aerial attacks on Al-Shabaab targets, which has assisted us.
However, analysts have expressed concerns over possible reduction of US forces in the African continent. For years, Washington continues to assist Somali forces in counterinsurgency campaigns by providing aerial support and mentoring an elite unit of the armed forces that has liberated towns and villages in the Lower Shabelle region. In September last year, Al-Shabaab launched a deadly attack on Belidogle, home to a US military training base in southern Somalia. The attack came after recent military successes was recorded on the battlefield by an elite unit of the armed forces known as Danab.
In the event of pulling out its troops from Africa, the US military influence will reduce and other global powers might take over. We know the US has several bases, including its biggest base in neighboring Djibouti. Some countries will feel the impact of any pullout and others will not, depending on the levels of military cooperation.
Close to 100 people were killed last month in a deadly truck bomb on the outskirts of Mogadishu. Al-Shabaab says the attacks reflect its attacking capability in urban centers. Meanwhile, as the country heads to the polls to elect members of parliament, experts say the army will rely on international military support as it makes inroads into Al-Shabaab strongholds in a bid to end decades-long insurgency that has claimed thousands of lives in Somalia and beyond. Abdulaziz Billo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Meanwhile, the US Pentagon is expected to make its final decision on troop withdrawal later this month. CGTN's Panina Karibe takes a look at the countries in which America has a military presence and the troops' role there.
About 200,000 US forces are stationed abroad, and of that number, roughly 7,000 are on rotation for a few months at a time here in Africa. The US Africa Command, AFRICOM, began operations back in 2007. It is here to support African partners alongside other allies with the goal of increasing the African countries' own security capabilities and stabilizing the region. So, where exactly are these troops and what are they doing there? Djibouti is one of the world's smallest countries, but it hosts more U.S. military personnel than any other African country. Roughly 4,000 U.S. military personnel in the continent are temporarily deployed to Djibouti. Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti is the only permanent U.S. base in Africa. It is the hub of a network of American drone bases in Africa that are used for aerial attacks against insurgents in Yemen, Nigeria and Somalia. In 2014, the U.S. signed a new 20-year lease on the base with the Djibouti government and committed over $1.4 billion to modernize and expand the facility in the years to come. Now, the country with the second most U.S. troops is Niger, and according to AFRICOM, it has an estimated 800. Now, you will recall it was there that the U.S. lost 4 soldiers back in 2017 October in a deadly ambush by a jihadist group that called itself the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. The Nigerian Airbase 201 only became operational in November last year, and it cost $110 million. It has been crucial in conducting surveillance, intelligence and reconnaissance operations across West and North Africa. Then we have Somalia, which has become a growth point for AFRICOM. It roughly has 400 U.S. military personnel who conduct airstrikes and ground operations against al-Qaeda-linked al-Shabaab militants in the country. Now, American involvement in Somalia has grown since President Donald Trump, early in his term, approved expanded operations against al-Shabaab. Cameroon has at least 300 U.S. troops, and they are based there to train and assist the Cameroonian military, including in its fight against extremism in its far northern region. Now, the U.S. does have some military presence in virtually every African country, even if it is small. And most nations, according to the Pentagon figures, have at least a handful of active duty personnel temporarily deployed there. Back to you.
Well, from Abuja, we are now joined by CT10's Phil Ehaza. Phil, France has been pleading with the United States not to withdraw its troops, especially from the Sahel region. How do you see such a withdrawal affecting security in the Sahel?
Oh, thank you, Karen. Definitely the withdrawal of the U.S. troops from the Sahel will not be something that will go very well with the security situation that the Sahel is currently faced with at the moment. We know that most of the U.S. formations in the Sahel, with 7,000 rotational forces, they're mostly providing tactical support, intelligence, and cover for the physical combat on ground with the various forms of insurgency groups. So definitely, it's going to be something that will be of high concern for not just the French countries, rather the Francophone countries, not just the European countries, but Africa as a whole, because for many years the fight against insurgency has been on in the bid to ensure that it doesn't spread to even far more countries than it is currently.
And Phil, unlike French troops in West Africa, the involvement of US troops has not been widely publicized. Why do you think this is the case?
What I'll say concerning that is the fact that, if you look at the operations of the U.S. forces here in the Sahel, most of the time it is providing tactical support, logistic support, trainings, and intelligence, for the military, from the various countries in the Sahel. For example, there's the drone base in Mali. There's a drone base in several other countries in the Sahel region. All of these military formations are also manned by the U.S. forces. And many times you don't get to hear the U.S. forces being killed in combat. Last month we heard 13 French soldiers killed in Mali when a helicopter was brought down by a missile from suspected insurgent groups. So most of the times that's the reason the U.S. forces are not that publicized as we see in the case of the French forces. The French forces are mostly involved in the physical combat, and that would be my submission for the fact that the U.S. forces are not always publicized.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That was Phil Ehaza there in Abuja for us. We are going to a short break now. Don't go away, lots more to come, including oil pipeline explosion in Nigeria kills 3 and injures several others. An online campaign begins to save 5 sick lions in a park in Sudan's capital, Khartoum.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
South Korea has confirmed 1 case of the viral pneumonia that originated from the central Chinese city of Wuhan. This comes after Wuhan itself reported 136 new cases over the weekend. That brings the total of confirmed cases in the city to 198 since the outbreak began last month. Meanwhile, 2 cases have been detected in Beijing. And in the southern province of Guangdong, 1 case was confirmed and another 8 are under observation. In the eastern province of Zhejiang, 5 people with fever and a cough are under observation there. Nationwide, 3 people have died and 25 have recovered. Besides South Korea, Thailand has reported 2 cases, while Japan has 1. Our reporter Zhao Yunfei has more from a train station in Wuhan.
If you come to any railway station here in Wuhan, you will see the just equipped body temperature detector. Now, the purpose of that is to prevent passengers who already got fever from traveling and possibly prevent the spreading of the novel coronavirus. Once they just enter the hall, I can smell the disinfectant fluid. When they see any suspected case, the case will be sent to the medical staff nearby. It is a very new measurement following the health department says some of the cases they found had no history of exposure to a seafood market where was believed the only source of the outbreak. Local health authority doesn't deny a possibility of human-to-human transmission. The train station in particular is just a few hundred meters away from the seafood market. Just in 40 days of Spring Festival travel rush period, more than 5 million passenger trips can be made from here at Hankou railway station. CGTN visited this railway station 2 weeks ago, but when we return, we see today there are more people wearing masks. But it's not odd at all, given the fact that this is the winter season, as many people wearing masks to prevent other diseases as well. Chinese people are quite familiar with coronavirus. SARS is also one kind of coronavirus. The outbreak of SARS came amid New Year period in 2003. The novel virus in Wuhan doesn't seem to be aggressive as SARS, despite number of pneumonia patients are expected to rise. WHO says it does not recommend any specific measures for travelers so far, and it released a statement saying that it advises against the application of any travel restrictions on China based on the information currently available. Zhao Yunfei, CGTN, Wuhan, Hubei Province.
Shanghai is also on high alert for pneumonia. The mayor of Shanghai says the city has strengthened measures to identify suspected cases.
We've strengthened the examination of suspected cases, and preventive measures have been taken for those who have had close contact with them. We'll pay greater attention to public health. If such cases are identified in Shanghai, we will report it to the public in accordance with the law and regulations.
Well, China says it is working with multiple parties to deal with the new coronavirus. At a press conference on Monday, a foreign ministry spokesperson said Beijing is in close communication with the World Health Organization and other relevant parties, and he called on other countries to immediately inform China of any suspected cases.
After receiving notification of pneumonia cases from the relevant countries, China has attached great importance to them. We are maintaining close communication and strengthening cooperation with all parties. If other countries also find suspected pneumonia cases, we welcome them to inform China straight away to reinforce preventative work. We'll work with all parties to tackle the epidemic and safeguard global health security.
3 people have been killed in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos, after a fire broke out on a pipeline owned by the country's state oil company. The fire burned nearby houses and vehicles. Many fires on pipelines are caused by theft and vandalism. Often the methods used to steal oil result in fire accidents. Witnesses say many others have been killed, but this has not been verified by authorities. Nigeria is Africa's biggest crude oil producer. It's not clear if there will be an impact on the operations of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. The NNPC spokesperson said the state oil company was assessing the situation.
We are informed from the preliminary report we gathered, we are informed that there's some undesirable elements that vandalize the pipeline, despite the fact that the state has provided a lot of security in place around all the right of our boat, of our pipeline.
People were running and I was asking why was this happening. Then I got here and they said pipeline vandals did this. These vandals are always doing this. There are burnt buildings, burnt cars and over 20 burnt trucks and many dead people.
Many trucks don't burn, like 20 trucks don't burn.
China has called for peace and harmony among the world's nations as it welcomes the new year. The Chinese embassy in South Africa's capital, Pretoria, opened its doors to visitors for the first time ever. 2020 is being observed as the year of the rat, the first of 12 signs in the Chinese zodiac. CGTN's Julie Shear joined in the celebrations at the embassy.
The Chinese embassy in South Africa's capital, Pretoria, rolled out the red carpet for dignitaries and guests to mark the start of New Year celebrations and share in one of the oldest Asian traditions.
We'd like to take this opportunity in this way to express our appreciation to all the friends in South Africa to developing China-South Africa relations and enhancing the mutual understanding and friendship between China, South Africa, and the rest of the world. Second, we would like to open the embassy to all friends to share the harmonious, open, inclusive Chinese cultural tradition.
2020 celebrates the rat, the first of 12 animals in the Chinese zodiac. Rodents are quick-thinking, a sign of wealth and surplus, and mark new beginnings.
Because Chinese New Year's is later than actual New Year's globally, it's very special for us Chinese people, especially if we're not in China, so we have to celebrate it even more.
This year is special because it's the rat year and it's 2020, and 2020 in Chinese it sounds like love you, love you.
This Spring Festival is very special. So we have many Chinese elements in Spring Festival. You can see this is Chinese movie. We also have Chinese books, Chinese pandas. I think everyone in here will enjoy themselves.
South Africa and China share a long and deep political relationship with rich cultural ties.
It's a brotherhood, really. It goes all the way back into our apartheid struggle, where China actually trained some of the comrades from South Africa. So yes, that's how strong the relationship is.
I'm here to celebrate with the Chinese when they're celebrating their New Year. Last year I was in China studying at Peking University, so I got invited by the ambassador to come join them in celebrating their New Year. Because when I was in China, the experience I got, the hospitality, it was superb.
A fortnight of Spring Festival celebrations has officially kicked off in South Africa. The atmosphere here is absolutely electric as the Chinese welcome the Year of the Rat. Julie Shire, CGTN, Pretoria, South Africa.
Meanwhile, Nigerians have also joined in Spring Festival celebrations. About 150 people attended a reception by the Chinese embassy in Nigeria to welcome in the new year. The Chinese ambassador to Nigeria spoke about the strategic partnerships the two countries have, stressing the need to deepen political trust as well as the Sino-Nigerian relationship. Zhou Pingyan revealed that Nigeria ranks as China's largest project contracting market in Africa. It's also the second largest export market and the third largest trading partner. The number of Nigerian students studying in China also remains the highest among African countries. An online campaign has been launched to save 5 malnourished and sick African lions being held in Sudan's capital. Netizens are calling for the animals to be moved to a better place. The 5 lions are being held in cages at Khartoum's Al Qureshi Park. For weeks, they've faced food and medicine shortages. The campaign is ongoing with the hashtag Sudan Animal Rescue. Park officials note that the condition of the lions has worsened over time, with some losing about 2/3 of their body weight. The park is managed by Khartoum municipality and funded in part by private donors. However, the overall condition of the park is also said to be affecting the animals' health. It's unclear how many lions are in Sudan.
Regarding the pictures of the lions that went viral on social media, they are here. They received treatment. They don't have problems, and the other is still being treated. We are facing a shortage of food supplies, but we managed to control it. We have a vet that will come to check on the animals.
We've got all the business news coming up for you after the break, including the UK hosts 16 African leaders for trade talks days ahead of Brexit. And South African Airways remains in business despite government missing its funding deadline.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Uganda's flour industry is projected to grow. The increase comes as the East African economy joins Kenya and Ethiopia in supplying flours to the lucrative and huge Chinese market. With more on this, here's CGTN's Michael Baleke.
Cutting to size, the rosebuds are being prepared for export. This sorting house handles more than 10 million rose stems every month, a number which could rise as the company prepares to enter the Chinese market.
Majority population is a young generation in China, and the population is too big. And now the people's liking and trend is changing in China, so it is upcoming market.
The Rosebud Farm is the biggest flower plantation in the country. In 2019, the company made several trial shipments of Ugandan cut flowers to China, and they are now finalizing paperwork to begin regular cut flower exports to the Asian giant's lucrative market.
We have compared and we have seen that people are liking Ugandan flowers very well, and price-wise also we can compete. So volume, price and quality, all we are in a competition, and we can do the better.
Ugandan cut flowers have until now been going to Canada, the USA, and the biggest consumer of flowers, the Netherlands. But Europe's economic woes are driving traders to look for alternative and stable markets in Asia. More than 25 varieties of rose flowers are grown at this 500-acre farm in central Uganda. The growing demand from China is pushing local flower companies to increase their acreage. Uganda's equatorial weather pattern is able to produce flowers all year round. In Africa, Uganda will be joining Kenya and Ethiopia, which are already supplying cut flowers to the lucrative Chinese market.
The big market was always in Amsterdam. Russia's opened its doors to our flowers. There are now people exporting flowers to Russia. Fruits, vegetables, avocado, it's become a big thing. So if we can get our act together and meet the phonosanitation standards, then we should be able to get into all these markets.
The floriculture sector is one of Uganda's top 10 foreign exchange earners after gold and coffee. Figures from Bank of Uganda show that in 2018 and 2019, the country exported more than 7,000 tons of flowers, contributing more than $50 million in revenue. And this figure is likely to go up as soon as Uganda's flower buds begin to sprout in China's market. Michael Balekesi, GTN, Kampala, Uganda.
The decision by Nigeria's central bank to raise the loan-to-deposit ratio of commercial banks in the country might have started yielding positive results. It's now becoming easier for small to medium enterprises to access banks and at lower rates. The Apex Bank raised the loan-to-deposit ratio in Nigeria to 65% last October in order to compel banks to lend to SMEs, retail, mortgage and consumer sectors. Here's Deji Badmus with more on that.
Perhaps nothing catches the new deal in the Nigerian banking industry than this giant billboard standing on a very strategic point in Lagos. SMEs have suddenly become the darling of commercial banks since the central bank raised their loan-to-deposit ratio to 65% and assigned a weight of 150% in respect to lending to small and medium enterprises, retail and mortgage.
There is currently a lot of credit going to the system. We've also seen a moderation in interest rates, in fact, a crashing of interest rates. Today, we are seeing banks deposit rates in the number of 2.56%. We've also seen a moderation in lending rates.
Among the SMEs who have benefited from the new loan regime is Tuteria, an e-learning startup where Kende Ishie is a finance manager.
Sometime last year, we discovered that as a growing company, the space where we were was a little too small for the number of staff that we had, and we decided, we have to get a bigger space, something more comfortable. So we reached out to our bank account manager and we said, okay, we're aware of this directive from CBN. Can you let us know how we can benefit? And then he got back to us and said, this is the amount that you guys, that your company really can take at this time. And in about a week, our accounts were credited. They just sent us the payment plan and all of that. And it was really little.
Before the new CBN LDR policy, it would have been practically impossible for small startups like Tuteria to get a loan from a bank.
But of course, we know that the SMEs brought a lot of risk to the banking system. And that's why the banks are reluctant to lend to them. But the central bank is trying to create incentives to make the banks lend to them. When the figures are out, we will see what additional volume of credit went to the SMEs. But the incentives are there for the banks to lend to the SMEs.
At some point, the central bank contemplated a further increase in the LDR to 70% to further drive more credit into the system and onto the hands of SMEs. But it stayed action on that at the moment, saying it had noticed a remarkable increase in the size of gross credit by deposit money banks to customers.
Should the central bank increase it to 70%, it could have unintended consequences. To the extent that the banks begin to look for very weak credit customers to lend to. And that could lead to an upswing in the non-performing loans.
For now, SMEs in the countries are enjoying some breath of fresh air as far as bank loans go. Their chances of securing low-interest loans are at their highest than ever. And like the message on this billboard demonstrates, quite a number of them are rushing to the banks, finding the offering on the table very irresistible. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
South African Airways will continue its scheduled operations despite uncertainties around its funding crisis. Business rescue practitioners previously set Sunday as the deadline to cut down on operations if funding had not been raised. However, the deadline has been extended. This comes after South Africa's Department of Public Enterprises confirmed it would persuade the National Treasury to come up with the money. The business rescue process depends on funds to finance restructuring and operations at the airline. Although the government promised to provide a total of $278 million, it's yet to keep its side of the bargain. African heads of state are attending a major sub-Saharan Africa investment conference hosted by British Prime Minister Boris Johnson in London. The first UK-Africa investment summit comes as Britain prepares to formally leave the European Union on January the 31st. The London event brings together businesses, governments and international institutions to promote investment opportunities worth over $8.4 billion. Africa is home to 8 of the 15 fastest growing economies in the world, yet only 4% of foreign direct investment is actually focused on the continent. As a result, Britain now wants to increase its presence on the continent as it seeks to become its #1 investor by the end of the decade. Let's now shift focus to another big event dominating headlines this week. US President Donald Trump and environmental activist Greta Thunberg are getting top billing at Davos this year. Thunberg is just one of a number of teenage change makers who will have a platform at the summit. Trump and Thunberg will appear at separate events within an hour of each other at the Swiss ski resort. This year's World Economic Forum, which begins on Monday, brings together about 3,000 of the world's richest and most powerful people. This as the conference turns its attention to climate crisis and sustainability.
To the world leaders and those in power, I would like to say that you haven't seen anything yet. You have not seen the last of us. We can assure you that. And that is the message that we will bring to the World Economic Forum in Davos next week.
Yes, but there's not only Greta here. There are many young people here. We have made a special emphasis in giving the young people a voice. And we should not just concentrate on Greta. She has certainly got a kind of celebrity status, but I'm thinking of this young girl whom we have here, who has changed at the age of 19 the whole policy of Indonesia concerning plastics. So what is important, if the young people are heard here, if they have an opportunity to meet President Trump, it would be great.
Now to a court case watched closely in Beijing, Ottawa and Washington. Monday marks the opening of an extradition hearing for Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou in Vancouver. It's been more than a year since she was arrested in Canada at the request of the United States. She's accused of bank fraud in violation of US sanctions on Iran. CGTN's Dan Williams has the story.
Meng Wanzhou will return to the court spotlight this week for the start of her extradition hearing. Huawei's chief financial officer was arrested in Vancouver in December 2018 following a request by the United States. She is accused of committing bank and wire fraud in violation of US sanctions on Iran. This phase of the hearing will focus on double criminality, an argument put forward by Meng's defense lawyers. They argue Meng should not be extradited, as her actions could not be considered crimes under Canadian law. Gary Botting is an extradition lawyer and had been part of Meng's defense team.
Well, the first phase deals with criminality, whether the allegations against Madame Meng are criminal in Canada, and they have to be criminal in both Canada and the United States. What she is alleged to have done is in a foreign country altogether, and we don't have jurisdiction in Canada to pursue that, and therefore it's fairly clear that there is no criminality in Canada.
One analyst says this next phase is critical.
To some extent, this is the pivotal part of the whole story, because everything is dependent essentially on the dual criminality. If dual criminality is upheld, if there is a decision by the court that this is not linked to sanctions, but it's all about bank fraud, then the rest of the trial is a more routine thing, and in general, those trials go toward extradition.
This next phase of the hearing promises to be crucial in a saga that stretches back more than a year. But although the immediate focus will be on events at this courthouse, the implications of the hearing are far more reaching.
Meng's extradition case has become highly politicised. After her arrest, US President Donald Trump said he could intervene if it helped secure a future trade deal with China, while relations between China and Canada have also been strained. Canada accused China of retaliation after China arrested two Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, on allegations of espionage. China says the arrests are not connected.
This is, by any account, the worst moment in Canada-China relations since 1970, since the opening of the resumption of diplomatic relations. So both sides have deep frustration and anger, and the outcome of this is the relationship is frozen.
There is much that hangs in the balance when this hearing begins. Dan Williams, CGTN, Vancouver.
We are going to a short break. Don't go away. Lots more coming up, including a DJ Academy gives hope to children from some of Cape Town's poorest families.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
To Cape Town now, where music is being used to drive young people away from a life of crime and to inspire them to follow their dreams of one day spinning the decks as professional DJs. The Underground Pro DJ Academy runs free workshops for underprivileged youth in Cape Town. CGTN's Travis Andrews caught up with them and filed this report.
Class of 2020 has begun, but this isn't any regular school. Your music plays just about all the time, and having fun goes hand in hand with learning. The Underground Pro DJ Academy's workshops are open to all underprivileged teens, anyone with a passion for the career, but a lack of resources to pursue it.
The main aim of this academy was to try and influence kids, or encourage kids to use their natural talents, and most kids love music. Get them in here, it's not just kids, but mostly kids, get them in here and teach them how to play music, how to use music to actually build a small business. Give them hope for times when there isn't hope.
The kids are taught not just the basic skills such as mixing and scratching, but they're also taught how to build their careers that could allow them to work as radio DJs, music producers, and even concert organizers. There is one prerequisite though. Kids have to be doing good at school in order to wreck the decks.
Part of the home music, the DJ school, we push for the kids to do well in education first. So before they come to the DJ school, we need to see how well they're doing at school first. And if they're not doing well, they're out of the program. So part of this program is more for educational purposes, building yourself and then building your brand afterwards.
Scratching forms part of their education as well, but it's a technical skill not employed by many professional DJs in Cape Town these days. Now these kids are not just committed to pursuing a life as a DJ in the music industry, but they also want to help other kids within their local community.
A lot of people inspire me and when I get older, I would like to inspire other people also.
I want to help kids get off the streets so no crime can hurt them.
I love music because I've been listening to music for years, and I like to help the children off the streets, and that's all.
The journey, though, will be long before these lot will be belting out tunes over the radio waves or in a Mother City nightclub. But they seem eager, dedicated, and passionate enough to turn their dreams into a reality. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
We've got all the sports news coming up for you after the break, including Egyptian Mohamed Salah on target as Liverpool beat Manchester United to move closer to the Premier League title.
How would you create